All right, so this would be the last of the environmental history of the U.S. This is current era part C. And so what we will do is share the screen for our last PowerPoint on this. And of course, that is not the one I'm looking for. So let me, why is that not the one on? Okay, so there it is. Okay, sorry about that. And try one more time. Let's see if we can just eat up the screen. So there we go. So we'll go and we will make that. Okay, so that's the end. You didn't see any of that. So here we go. Oh, isn't technology wonderful? Okay, so current era C. This is our last one. And so we're going to go through some of the, I guess, modern day presidents. Nixon. So if you think of Nixon, good president, bad president, obviously associated with Watergate. He was impeached, stepped down, Vietnam War. So lots of things that people were upset about. Also had decent foreign policy and environmental president. He actually did a pretty good job. So the 70s were the environmental decade. He actually established his NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. The important part of that is you got established environmental impact studies, what we call EISs. And before you can build or do anything on a property, you have to do an EIS and assess what that is going to do to the environment. And we have a lot of that in Southern California. We had a lot of that right across the street in the wildlife sanctuary. If you get to ever go back on campus, we expanded the wildlife sanctuary, and we'll talk about that, to 26 acres. And some of that is due to EIS studies, and some of for building the new stadium, they had to set aside some property. And so we'll talk about that further. The first annual Earth Day, April 20th, 1970. So we just had 2020, we just had our 50th year. And unfortunately, COVID, so not good. The EPA was established, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, and then also the Endangered Species Act in 1973. So Nixon did quite a bit for the environment. Did some terrible things also. All right, and the environmental decade, there's also some issues. There is the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, which gave BLM a lot of power. And if you type in BLM today, it's Black Lives Matter. But BLM actually stands for the Bureau of Land Management. I'll say it again, Bureau of Land Management. And they're ones that manage some of the federal lands. And they're the ones that grazing rights and oil production. And so very resource oriented, more so than preservation like a national park. But they will run some of the national monuments. And one of the ideas right now is BLM has just, I believe today or yesterday, signed an agreement for drilling in Alaska. And there's still going to be fights on that in court, but they have signed a letter of intent, I guess you would call it. It has actually an official name. But so anyway, the Sagebrush Rebellion was at the end of the 70s, was kind of a push against the BLM. And one of the problems is local states, especially ones that have lots of national monuments and parks, are pushing back, saying that the federal government is cutting them off for some of their resources for their economies. And so the Sagebrush Rebellion was protest trying to get the federal lands back into state power. And so lots of clashes going on during that time, and actually some major standoffs and things like that. All right, Jimmy Carter. I don't know, Habitat for Humanity, done some wonderful things. He was probably considered at the time a very weak president. Environmentally, though, he established the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977, which regulates strip mining. So trying to slow down the destruction. We'll talk about mining and its effects on the planet later in the semester. He established the DOE, which was probably important. It controls and establishes nuclear weapons and nuclear power. So that's definitely a big issue. We've got nuclear power issues with some of our power plants being offline. What are we going to do with that waste? And then in 1980, he signed the Superfund, federal program to clean up very hazardous sites. I do want you to know the name of that Superfund. I want you to know that year. And it's actually officially called CERCLA, Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. And again, known as the Superfund. And so this is the Love Canal, which was drained, and you can see all the barrels that were illegally dumped into the canal of toxic waste and in New York. And so the idea was we're spending money to go in there and clean these up. And then it always backlashes on the Wise Use movement. I used that term before for conservationists. Came back up again and trying to weaken some of the environmental laws. Ronald Reagan, economy-wise, put the country into debt, but actually our economy was running good. People were making money, but definitely anti-environmental, very pro-business. And we were actually at one point the leaders in solar energy because solar energy was being subsidized by the government, which gasoline is too. And he basically pulled all those subsidies. He said that if solar energy was a good idea, it should be able to stand on its own. So we have gone from the leader to definitely running behind in those technologies now. And the Bushes. Yeah, he pulled out of international efforts at the Earth Summit. He would not sign the biodiversity treaty because it would affect our economy. And you have to remember, he is an oil man. Now, actually, he did some decent things for the environment. I don't want to say that he was totally bad. he did set some things right, did spend some money. But this is the idea when global warming was starting to take effect and starting to be in the news, and he was against it. And then Bill Clinton, I don't know what kind of president you think he was. He was popular. He was a sleazeball. Had sex in the Oval Office. Or it depends on how you define it, I guess, or how he defined it if you watched the impeachment hearings. But he did set aside a bunch of areas and was decent on the environment. Nothing really stands out, though. Probably the biggest thing I would want you to know is he's responsible for the California Desert Protection Act. That would hit the California Bay Delta water fight, which they're still fighting today. But those two things are very California oriented and helped us. All right, then George W. Bush again. He was actually not great on the environment also, but you got to remember that the Bushes were oil men, and that's where their fortunes came from. And so he also would not sign the Kyoto Protocol. And if you notice with the Bushes and today, and it's always, I guess, in politics, is environment and economy. Those are always held as two separate entities. And if one is protected, the other suffers and vice versa. And later in the semester, we may want to talk about, is that the case? And I'll tell you, COVID-19 right now, the environment, again, is taking a hit. You don't hear about global climate change as much because of the pandemic. So Um, things go on. And then Obama, you know, again, lots and lots of agreements. The Paris Agreement was probably one of the bigger things for him. So you might want to know the Paris Agreement. And then he actually, so number 2 and number 10 maybe would be probably the ones I would remember, 2 and 10. So the International Climate Agreement, working with China, what we call it the Paris Agreement is how most people call it. That was, we're really going to work on trying to get our greenhouse gases down. And then he set aside more land than anybody else as national monuments. Again, a president can do that. And so leads us to all the different places that he put. And you can see some of the ones, Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad monument. There's a movie out called Harriet. Good movie. I don't think it was a great movie. I think, you know, personal opinion, but definitely an autobiography on her. Very good if you like to read about her life and the Underground Railroad. But anyway, so designate 23 national monuments. And then Trump, our current president, what I do want you to know is this is a current article that came out just recently, so I put a link to it. Harvard Law School put it out. 70 environmental rules and regulations officially reversed in his first 3.5 years as president. Definitely pro-business, very, very anti-environmental. First thing he did was trying to shut down a lot of things that the Obamas had done, and immediately came out and said that he is going to, again, monuments can be changed by a single person, the president, and so he was going to eliminate some of the ones that were nominated or made monuments by Obama. He would have been the first president to ever do that. A few monuments have actually been taken down, or at least the parks have been moved down to monuments, but no president has officially gone out and just shut one down. He would have been the first. Somebody talked to him, and he ended up not. He reduced the size of the 3 that you see there so they can do mining and some other things around there, but he did not end up taking them off the monument status. And I, you know, not to pick on the man, but he also just signed the great, let's see if I get it right, the Great American Outdoor Law Fund bill. I forget what it was called, but and he put a lot of money into the national parks to shore up the infrastructure. Money that has been needed for a very long time to kind of heal some of the long-term issues. So again, nobody's in a vacuum. However you feel about any of these presidents, we're in this class keying into environmental issues and humans on the planet. And so that's what I want to keep in mind. We don't live in a vacuum. We are all in this together. And so everybody has issues and everybody has strengths. So that's what we'll talk about throughout the semester. And we will stop the recording.